Hello, everyone. I'm Ted Everingham. I'm speaking to you from the Sheldon Room of the historic Alger House at the Grosse Pointe War Memorial here on the shores right through that window of Lake St. Clair. Welcome to the last of the season of our American Democracy series. Tonight, we're going to visit with three experts who will help us to explore, to remember, and perhaps better understand the continuing impact of the 2020 presidential election. We'll be joined by three University of Michigan-Dearborn professors who follow closely elections and their aftermath. Communications Professor Tim Kiska will join us, political science professors Julio Borquez, welcome back, Julio, and Nancy Kursman. And we'll revisit that 2020 election and the events leading up to it, the election itself, the media landscape, the media coverage, post-election events, good and bad. We'll talk a bit, I'm sure, about the wave of changes in voting laws that are being proposed and in some cases passed across the nation. This election, I would propose to you, is both unlike any other, but also very much like elections that preceded it. In response to the global pandemic, voting was made more convenient for people, probably more, we know more people voted in the election than ever before. That was followed by claims of fraud, as you know, lawsuits, legislation, violence, debate, anger, and those will continue for some time. Our panelists tonight, our guests tonight are Professor Julio Borquez, who's an associate professor of political science at the University of Michigan-Dearborn. Julio, thank you. He teaches courses, I'd love to take these courses, Julio, on campaigns and elections, public opinion, and research methodology, and he has a PhD from the University of Michigan. Tim Kiska is an associate professor of communication at the University of Michigan-Dearborn. He teaches courses on communications, journalism, and screen studies. You may recognize his name because he was a working journalist at the Free Press, the Detroit News, and he continues work with WXYZ Channel 7 here in Detroit. And Nancy Kursman, who joined us late. Thank you for coming in, Nancy. Nancy's a lecturer in political science and the director of the public service internship program at the University of Michigan-Dearborn. She teaches courses in public administration, public policy, and political science, and has a doctorate from Rice University, and is a kind of amateur journalist of the media, of the electronic version, and a history and political science major. I'm in the tall clover here. I'm just delighted to have this conversation. So let's start the conversation just by throwing out a really general question and let you folks start chewing on it. How did all of this get started? And what role, Tim, if any, did the American media coverage of the election and the events the campaign leading up to it play in where we found ourselves? Tim, I think you're muted.
When you say what got started exactly? Well, 2016 was, in terms of media, a total change. I mean, if you look back, I'm just old enough to remember '72 election. There was a brilliant book called The Boys on the Bus. And it was basically about, back then, it was R.W. Apple and AP that almost set the tone, Associated Press, to everything. And the whole goal, if you're a national campaign person, is to get your candidate on the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite. Fast forward to 2016, I think Twitter and Donald Trump, and to a large degree, social media in general, made a lot of these folks, I wouldn't say irrelevant, but coming close. I mean, the world just changed, and I think it stayed. I think it was more of the same in 2020, where you noticed that a lot of people, I think people were living in their own little bubble, and we all live in our own little bubble, I suppose. But you never had to, if you didn't want to, you can build a world around yourself that you never had to learn anything that might disturb you. And I think that's what's changed. And it's, by the way, this turned out to be a great thing for some news organizations. The New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal are all doing better than they've ever done. Where it's really killing things, and I think this is closer to home, is local news coverage, closer to home. Let me sound like an old guy for a minute. You know, in the late 70s, when I was at the Free Press, I was part of the city county bureau. Yeah. 4 of us. One guy did nothing every day, not did nothing, he did every day. He went to every nanosecond of every city council meeting. I was at every board of commissioners meeting and covered Wayne Circuit Court. The other 2 people had other duties. You don't have any of that now. And I think that it's the local papers that are getting really clobbered. And what's happening now is when, you know, who's covering the state rep races, who's covering the mayor's races, that sort of thing. That's the problem we've got now, I think, in my opinion.
Julio, Nancy, I see Nancy, you're nodding your head.
Yes, of course. That 2016 changed the whole dynamics of how candidates go right over the head of journalists. And I don't know that's for the better. When you can simply tweet out resignations or firings or changes of policy, it really changes governance and the process of how candidates communicate with our citizens. And we lose valuable insight and analysis and context when we don't have journalists to explain and put this in a historical and in a comparative context. So we lost a lot.
Yeah, and I think over time that there's been a feedback mechanism here at work, that as the media landscape becomes more fragmented, the electorate becomes more polarized. And when candidates are trying to send out messages, they aren't speaking to the people, they're speaking to they're speaking to particular constituencies. And technically you can do that now, right? I mean, Tim, you're going back to the early 70s, and I was a high schooler then, and I remember sitting down, and you had 3 stations to choose from. You had ABC, CBS, NBC, and I lived in the hinterland, so we didn't get PBS. So anyway, yeah. So it is a feedback mechanism. Candidates can reach out to their core constituencies, and the core constituencies can retreat to their bubble, where the information they receive just sort of validates what they already believe. Nancy, you alluded to policymaking. Then it becomes really problematic, because the larger, the big picture gets lost.
But aren't there those who would say that by losing the commentary that goes with coverage, that the commentators shape opinion to match their own, and therefore we're not getting just unfiltered news, we're getting people trying to persuade us is what's happening? Is journalism evil in that regard, Tim? You're muted again. Tim, you're muted. There you go.
There we go. In terms of the commentators evil?
Well, if the candidate would like to speak directly to the people,
right,
meaning his constituents, and rather than me turning on the news at 6:30 and hearing what the candidate said or did that day,
right,
the candidate may be thinking that one or more of those people delivering the news for me at 6:30 in the evening or 11 o'clock at night is really interpreting and commenting on the news and trying to form an opinion to inform my opinion rather than just delivering the news.
Right.
Is that a danger?
I still don't buy into, I know where you're coming from on this. I'm still not buying into that, because most people who get into journalism, and I'll just speak for myself, we're not into it. Most people who are into journalism are not there to, they're not change the world. I mean, my God, change the world to what? To my view? Oh my God. Uh, it's not that. Most of us, I got to tell you, are adrenaline freaks. Period. Adrenaline freaks. We like the excitement. We like the excitement of the chase, chasing a big story. That's what we're into it for. But now I think certain people have sort of turned this into, oh, no, 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 no. So-and-so, you know, the commentators are out to change your mind. And what's happened now is, by the way, that Fox has developed a very good business model. They're making an absolute fortune speaking to a certain crowd that's always going to be with them, the audience, you know, and I think that's something new. You never heard Eric Severide kind of go on that, in that direction on CBS, or Howard K. Smith on ABC, who used to do commentary. You didn't see much of that, but now it's the commentators that have become the big stars: Hannity, Tucker Carlson, Rachel Maddow, that sort of thing. And I think people now are confused. They're thinking that Rachel Maddow or Sean Hannity are reporters. They're not. They're commentators. And I think people's perception of what journalism is totally at this point skewed. And I don't know. And we've done a lousy job of selling ourselves, trying to explain to people that no, I'm not here to get anybody to vote Democratic or Republican or anything like that. I'm just out here to explain what is going on. Nothing more complicated than that. But I don't think people are buying it anymore. I don't know what the latest numbers. I don't know what the latest numbers are, but you know, by the way, it's always a great thing to be skeptical of what you're seeing or hearing. You really should. That's healthy. And I think the only way we're going to overcome the situation we're in now is for people in general to develop critical thinking skills when it comes to consuming media. And I don't know if that's going to happen, how that's going to happen, you know. So
I raised the question hoping we get to that point, because I think it's the public needs to bring some critical thinking to the table.
yeah,
I think there's room. I think there's room for both journalists, that is, reporters of facts,
yes,
and people who comment.
absolutely.
I have a good friend here who watches the evening news, and he has a rotation. He'll watch ABC for a number of days, and then he'll watch CBS for a number of days, and then NBC for a number of days. I don't know if he gets to Fox or CNN, but he does that intentionally, trying to get some balance, and sort out the commentary from the news reporters.
You know, here's the weird, odd spin to this whole thing. So we're able to put ourselves in this our own little bubble, but at the same time, we're living in a world where there's more information available than ever. Just running up to this, I was wondering if somebody was going to start asking questions about the Detroit election. So I decided, okay, I'm going to look up Judge Tim Kennedy's decision, you know, on this, which runs about 25 pages. It took me, what, 10 seconds to get it, you know, not too much longer to read the thing. That would have been impossible 15 years ago. You'd have to put on your hat and coat and walk down to City Hall and that kind of stuff. Now, almost everything, a lot of stuff is great. Volumes of information are available, click of a mouse, and I don't think people are taking advantage of it.
Yeah.
Well,
Well,
I
you
would,
know, it's. I'm
go
sorry.
ahead, Julio.
Well, just to follow up on that, Tim, very, very quickly, that if you look at, there's over the years, there's been a whole string of studies basically trying to assess basic levels of citizen knowledge about politics and public affairs. And those numbers have been flat for the last 30 years. So despite the technological developments, despite the information explosion, et cetera, basic levels of citizen knowledge about the political landscape, that's remained static, right? Yeah, the information is there and there's tons of it, but yeah. It hasn't,
I was going to say that
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry, Nancy.
I was going to say that although there is lots of information out there, as one of my professors once mentioned to me, information doesn't equal knowledge. And it's a critical point. You know, there's a lot. In fact, one of the things that many of our students say is, I don't know what to believe. There's so much out there. And that is, there is too much out there, and it's not putting it in a context that's understandable. How does this relate to me is what they want to know. And a lot of them don't, oh, for sure they don't watch the nightly news. If I find a student that knows Sean Hannity or Rachel Maddow, I'm lucky, because seriously, they get their news from social media. Because I've asked them, where do you get your news? And then I've asked them in assignments to try and pick several different media. And they found it very strange to read about the news, which I thought was pretty interesting, because I read my news, but they look at their feed for news. And so you're getting a very, it's an understatement to say it's biased.
I think you're right. And Julio, one of you said a few minutes ago that we have access, at least in theory, we have access to more information more quickly than ever in the history of man. It's all there, and the challenge is to what do we do with it? And I hear what you're saying. I taught as a kind of fill-in professor in a journalism program here in Detroit for one semester. And I would try to get the students to, we're talking about the media and the press and how this all works. And I would try and take something from one of the local newspapers, a story, and see how that principle that we were going to be discussing that night applied to the story. And I would say something like, I'm sure you all read the story in yesterday's Free Press about, and eyes were glazing over because they weren't reading. These are people who were training to be journalists, Tim, and whose eyes were glazing over because they don't read, or these people weren't reading newspapers. They were looking at blogs and they were looking at social media. How do we get past that?
Well, listen, I don't know, and if anybody knows, I'll give you my cell phone. I don't know. I mean, because I have the same experience with my journalism students, and believe me, they're not stupid. In fact, they're highly intelligent. But it's sort of a habit that you develop early on. I mean, hell, I remember catching a bus to De La Salle, and I would read the paper on the bus back in the mid to late 60s, right? But that was a habit I developed back when I was actually in grade school.
Yeah.
These kids aren't developing that habit, they're developing this habit. I don't know how you fly in the face of that. You're not going to talk them into reading newspapers again.
I don't either. And Tim, I will hasten to add that the school in which I was teaching for a semester, because the person who taught this course was on sabbatical for a semester, Ben Burns asked me to teach.
Oh yeah, okay, my buddy.
He was at Wayne State. Yeah. And the students, as you say, were very bright.
Oh yeah.
Newspapers weren't something they did. So I began copying the story that I wanted to be the focal point of our discussion and texting it to them, not emailing, because email is so 20th century. And it was disappointing because I love the ink on my fingers. You know, I love reading newspapers. Let me change course here just a little bit. A lot has been said about the election of 2020. There's never been one like it. All of this happened. We had debates that weren't really debates. We had the Twitters and the so on. In what respect, however, was this election normal, if at all?
Well, I can offer you one suggestion. In terms of partisan loyalty, it was a very typical election. Democrats, almost 95% of them turned out for the Democratic candidate, and Republicans vice versa. So party loyalties stood very, very solidly. And there was very few people who could be persuaded to change their vote. So, and that's been going on for a long, long time. So partisan loyalty is very strong and entrenched. And there's very few people that are persuadable by events such as a pandemic. It doesn't change anything because you interpret the pandemic through your partisan lens. So that was very typical.
Julio?
Yeah, well, basically what you had in 2020 was an incumbent president running for re-election. And in those kinds of situations, the campaign basically becomes a referendum on the incumbent. And that's what we had in 2020. And if anything, you know, if we know anything about Donald Trump, he was going to make sure that the election was about him. And that's what we saw. And so, and you know, just to fill out that picture very quickly, so you have an incumbent running for re-election at a time when the economy is on shaky ground due to the pandemic. You have an incumbent running for re-election when most Americans did not approve of his handling of the pandemic. You have an incumbent running for re-election at a time when most Americans disagreed with the president on most major policy issues. I mean, I can go on and on here, but you have a situation where, you know, Joe Biden's victory actually becomes pretty predictable, okay? And so, I mean, I think that's the backdrop you need to keep in mind when Donald Trump then starts saying, well, gosh, the election was stolen. There's no way I could have lost this. There are 5 decades of political science research that were predicting that, yeah, you're gonna lose because there are just too many things working against you.
Looking back into recent history, though, are there other elections about which you could say that? I'm thinking about Jimmy Carter, incumbent president, lost. Is that a parallel?
That's yeah. Jimmy Carter in 1980 is a parallel. I would say George Bush in 92 is something of a parallel. And those were both one-term presidents who lost their re-election bids. Yeah.
And so,
like I said, what happened to Donald Trump was not unprecedented, and in fact was rather predictable. Yeah.
Nancy, you're a political scientist as well. Do you agree? Was it a predictable outcome based on history?
Oh, I think it was, but it's also important to note that there's many states that it was a pretty close shave. You know, Michigan, for example, was a very close shave. So, and I think for many people going up to the election, people were kind of sitting on pins and needles and wondering what exactly is going to happen here. And are we going to have another situation like Bush Gore? Or excuse me, yeah, Bush Gore. Are we going to have that situation again where we're going to have contest after contest that could possibly go, you know, someplace like to the Supreme Court? So I know a lot of people I know were sitting on the edge of their seats wondering about it, even though all our research and studies show us that this is probably going to turn out this way. And Donald Trump is he's a very unusual candidate, and his hold on his base is something that we haven't seen in, you know, a very long time in American history.
I think that's true. And here's a man who's not a career politician by any means, and has developed a remarkable hold on his constituency. And people can argue whether that's good or bad, and I'm not trying to say either, but it's a fact that he has developed a very loyal constituency without being a career politician. It's pretty remarkable in that sense.
Well, I still have people, you know, if you drive through rural America, there's many people that still have Trump signs out. And that loyalty and that love for him goes very deep. I mean, think about going back to FDR, and I think about my grandparents' love for FDR and how they revered him and talked about him as saving the country. Obviously, a very different person, but that intense attraction. I mean, you can think of all the politicians we've had over so many years where people would throw up their hands and say, oh, it's just a politician, you know, another politician, without having that charismatic hold. And so the devotion to that particular candidate is so unusual.
I
Yeah,
think
you
this-
know, Trump is, I think, sort of the exclamation point. I mean, politics has been turning into entertainment for some time. And I think he's the ultimate, I hate to use the word entertainer, but I don't know, is that a right word, political scientist? Whatever it is, he grabs that camera, in a way that nobody else does. And so, I mean, that's why I'm not surprised that he's a big deal at this moment, because it's been trending this way for quite some time.
Yeah.
And let me ask you this: William Howard Taft, early part of the 20th century, good president, morbidly obese. A guy like that couldn't run right now.
Mm.
People would be all over him, even though this guy was a brilliant guy. This is where we are now, where it's another part of this. I hate to sound cynical, but it's another part. It looks to me like another part of the circus, and that part scares the hell out of me.
Mhm.
and understandably so. I'm sitting here thinking I'm probably older than the three of you. I know I'm older than the three of you. I remember the election of 1960. And I remember what I think were the first televised presidential debates. Is that
Yep.
not true? Yeah.
Mhm.
And again, Nancy, they may not have changed a lot of people's minds, but it seems to me that they were more newsworthy than some of the sniping we've seen in more recent presidential debates. Maybe that's just because I was naive and getting ready to vote in my first election.
Well, there's
There was
something.
some research that showed that people that listened to the debate came away with a very different impression than people that watched it. And it showed the power of the visual image in shaping people, that particular debate.
There was a great anecdote by Don Hewitt, who later created 60 Minutes, but he was the producer of that debate.
Right.
And his account was, it looks in the audience, and about half the audience is politicians going, wow, we've just figured out another way to sell our people. And the other half were TV executives who said, we're about to make a fortune from these guys who want to sell their candidates. And I think what you saw, Ted, was a pivotal moment. That was the first televised debate, and I think that set us on the path. So,
But it set us on the path, but was that debate different in tenor and tone than what we've seen in more recent elections? And not just 2020, but more recent elections.
yeah, there weren't any that I remember. I've watched that debate many times because I used it in one of my history of broadcasting classes, and there weren't anybody trying for a gotcha moment that I could see. And in fact, Nixon and Kennedy were fairly close on a lot of issues.
Right.
But no, I think there was the tone was entirely different.
Yeah. I think that's my memory. And Nancy, I agree with you. I saw a debate. I listened to some on radio. I'm an old radio fan. I love radio. And you came away with different views. The television element, we didn't know it at the time, I guess, probably, but it was the beginning of something new. And you probably could trace that thread right from 60 to 64 to 68 and right on to 2020. And I don't know where it's going to go next. I don't know. It's interesting. So looking ahead and looking at what we've learned from leading up to the election in last November and where we've been since, and I'm not taking sides, but we've seen some kind of extraordinary things, claims and counterclaims. Will the American public at some point become tired of this and say, let's get back to the basics? Will 2024 be different than 2020? What do you think?
Oh.
I stumped the professor, folks.
Yeah,
I don't know. I mean, on my worst nightmare moments, I kind of look at this, what's going on right now. We're taking a drug, and it's got to be more and more powerful. So Trump is the drug of the moment, the entertainment of the moment, and then we're going to need something even wilder. I used to think, well, if some kind of foreign invader came in and killed 600,000 people, maybe that would change things.
Yeah.
Guess what, folks? It happened, and it didn't change. I don't know. In fact, some ways the reaction kind of made it worse. So I don't know where this ends. That's the scary part.
I wouldn't expect things to be too much different. Certainly not by 2024, because well, for one thing, Trump may still be part of the scene. But even if he's not, the conventional wisdom within the Republican Party right now is that Trump is the template, right? So any presidential hopefuls that fill in a Trumpless landscape, they're going to be working from his example. If you look at DeSantis, you look at Josh Hawley, they're all working from what they think is the Trump playbook, because they see that as the path to the Republican nomination. And in that sense, things are not likely to change. And the other thing, just to kind of back up here for a moment, and I'm not saying this I was about to say, I'm not saying this to pick on the Republican Party per se, although I suppose I am in a way. An important thing to remember about Donald Trump is that in some ways, even going back to 2016, Trump was not fundamentally shaping the direction of the Republican Party. His appeal took hold in large part because he was going someplace where a lot of Republicans already were. The Republican Party was already lurching to the right on immigration. Okay, they were, and Trump sort of, he was riding a wave that was already building, and that wave had been building for a while, and it's not going to dissipate in the next 4 years. Now what happens beyond that, I don't know, but at least going into the next cycle, I'm not expecting things to be a whole lot different, at least on the Republican side. The tenor, the agenda, a lot of that, I wouldn't be at all surprised if it's a lot like what we're hearing now.
Nancy,
Or even coarser. I think it's definitely possibly coarser debate and coarser because there's no incentive to change, right? I mean, we have our bubbles, we have social media feeds, we have primaries in which donors drive a lot of how candidates need to present themselves in order to get more donations. So given these dynamics of these activists and these primaries that are heavily fueled by extremists, there's no incentive to change and come to the middle. I don't see any incentive. We had a terrible pandemic that killed hundreds of thousands of people, and that still didn't bring us together. So if that can't do it, I don't know what would. I hate to be so down, but I don't see anything on the horizon that will bring us back to some type of modicum of compromise. Politics is the essence of compromise. But I think that people either never learned that or don't believe it, which is sad.
and I was going to get to that question. I've got a granddaughter, a very bright young woman, finishing up her studies at Michigan. And she said to me over a lunch, I think she was still a senior in high school. She said, "Grandpa, the problem is we're too polarized. We don't talk to each other. There is no middle anymore." And Nancy, I think that's what I'm hearing from you.
Sure, we are very polarized, and
And
we define ourselves by whether we wear a mask or not, and in the most trivial of ways. We don't want to talk to the guy down the street who had the Trump sign or the Biden sign, even though before the election we were friends, and that's a tremendous loss of the social fabric. a lot of that lies with Trump, really does. And he added a lot of fuel to the fire, and it raged, sadly.
Yeah, that's true, and it's certainly polarization is there, and I'm not seeing a lot of stumbling back toward the center. And of course, if one person is polarizing to the right, that's going to tends to drive people to polarize to the left. And then so this is, I'm not a political scientist, but it seems to me that that just drives people farther apart. There's no incentive to come back together. But at some point, do naive people like me who just pull a lever when they vote are going to insist that somehow right begin talking to left again? Will that happen? I don't see it happening in 2024. I think you're right. The template's there. But I guess what I'm asking is, does the populace have any power, any possibility of bringing people back toward the center, at least talking to one another constructively? Or is that a boyhood dream, a memory of a better time?
You know, all I can talk about is the journalism end of this.
Okay.
And there's a lot of money being made on peddling outrage. Lots of it. Fox is just crawling in money. I mean, MSNBC, CNN are doing quite well, thank you very much, by peddling outrage. And if you told them, well, let's kind of go back to the center, who's going to watch? That's my question. And it's sort of like, so then what do you do about that? If you're Jeff Zucker, the president of CNN, say, Jeff, you know, as a responsibility to your country, you got to maybe get your guys to back off a little bit. Or somebody calls up Rupert Murdoch and says, Rupert, you're making a mess of things over in the United States. How do you think they're going to respond? You know, they're making money off of this. And I'm not saying this is sort of the great American way, unfortunately, or the great capitalist way. What do you do? You know, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. Now I think people right now are, you know, in terms of news, are saying, screw this. Let me get a Netflix account and see what I can find. And yeah, I mean, so I don't know. But the political scientists can handle the other side of this thing. You know,
You'll report it when it happens.
that's right. Right. I can do the exit polls. I can do the indicator polls, but I can't do this stuff. So.
You know, when you see poll results that show that, you know, growing percentages of young adults say that they won't date someone from the other party, that's not a promising scenario.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, you know, when I was in college, I dated someone from the other party because, you know, she would go out with me, you know. And I would have preferred to go out with other Democrats, but they kept saying no. You know, there you go. But that was, you know, that was a different time. Yeah, but you know, you look at those numbers, and yeah, it's that's not promising.
Oh.
Yeah.
Right. There's no reason for us to think this. The nice thing is, if the American people did get sick of this, and if they did demand, we want candidates that can talk to each other, and we are not going to vote for this guy because he's spewing outrage. If we demanded that, they would have to go back to the middle, to talking to each other. But we're not demanding it, so they're not giving that to us.
Well, and if I may, I think another way of looking at that is that the populace today is so wed to one side or another. There's not much incentive except throw up their hands and say, those damned fill in the blank Republican Democrats don't understand, and rather than why can't we get back together? Right. Is there room for a third party in this country to bring people back together? What do you think?
Not in our political system. Not if we have single member districts with plurality winners. I mean, there have been cases of third parties winning local elections or city council elections, but you know, the fact that we have 2 independents in the US Congress is amazing. And there's not going to be any more because they can't win given our political system. If we had a proportional system, or if we did ranked order voting, those kinds of ideas, sure, but not the way the system is structured right now.
Yeah, okay. Julio, I assume that you agree with that
Oh,
analysis.
yeah. The rules of the game throw up enormous obstacles to third parties. Yeah.
It's the money is the big problem, because of, you know, there's so much that gets poured into both sides that if you're a third party, where do you go to raise money? And you need money to run a proper political campaign. I don't remember off the top of my head what was the last US Senate race, how much got spent on that in this state. It was in, you know, how do you, a third person coming in, good luck, you know, trying to.
Right. Which is a problem currently, given that one of our major parties has seemed to have lost interest in governing responsibly. So, you know, we don't actually have a functioning 2-party system right now. Yeah, I mean, but that is a quandary, because I mean, if you're concerned about the current health of the party system, it's not going to be solved by the entry of a third party, because the rules of the game just aren't going to allow that. I mean, it's going to be a matter of, and again, I don't want to just pick on the Republican Party, but they are the problem currently. Either the Republican Party is going to have to regain its health, or it's going to have to be displaced by another second party.
I raised,
Which is a tall order.
yeah, I
Yeah.
raised the question because it was in someone's mind, and I
Yeah.
here, and I think you're right. It would probably be a great solution, but it won't work. And I saw Tim as I was asking the question doing this. There's a lot of money has a lot to do with it, the whole thing.
And you saw what happened with Liz Cheney, right? I mean, when Liz Cheney tried to present opposition to Trump, I want to step back from this. I want to be a responsible Republican. I mean, you know, they kicked her out.
Well, that's what we used to talk about as, you know, party discipline. You're one of us, you aren't. I remember talking about that back on the campus of my college when I was a student 100 years ago. And I think it's I started to say still true. I think it's even more true today than it was then. Again, we're back to the polarization, aren't we?
Yeah.
You're either way over here or way over there, and not much in the middle. You know, the vote in Congress, vote in the Senate, was it yesterday? 50-50, right down the middle. No wiggle room for anyone. It's just the way it was. And again, I'm guessing that the political scientists among our group, and probably Tim, you too, would have predicted that outcome.
Yeah, easy.
Yeah. I mean, and it's a terrible shame that we're gridlocked. We have a nation of 320 million people who are essentially held hostage by several people. I mean, what kind of functional democracy is that? That legislation can't move forward because we can't even get a majority.
Yeah, and that's troubling to a lot of people, I think, that we, the people who are paying the bills, are the victims of this gridlock, that I can't get my way, he can't get his way, and nobody seems to care that there might be a path in the middle where everybody would be a little unhappy. A litigator friend of mine, a lawyer, used to say the best settlement is one where both sides are a bit unhappy.
Mhm.
We don't have any room for being a bit unhappy. We're either ecstatic or we're crushed, one way or another. So I don't see that changing right away.
Yeah, it's that
And did,
scorched earth politics that we're in right now. I don't think this is going to last forever. Just don't know how it's going to end. That's all. So
I don't know how or when.
Yeah.
Or when. I think it will. I mean, it almost has to, doesn't it?
there's been times in the past where parties were extremely divided. You know, we look back at the 1880s, 1890s, and, you know, this was a time of high partisan division. It has happened before. It's possibility that something like that can happen again, where we swing back to the middle, but it doesn't look like it's going to happen soon, which is a great shame, because at least from my perspective, there's a lot of things that need doing, that need to get solved now, that are getting put off. You can think of immigration, you can think of the infrastructure, you can think of childcare. These are critical issues for a country in the 21st century that needs to compete globally. And we're not doing that because of a broken political system.
I can't do more than shake my head. Julio, I'm sure you're agreeing.
Yeah, I'm downright depressed at this point. Yeah. Where was I going with it? There's an interesting local angle on this. I mean, I think it comes back to, something that Nancy said. And part of this has to do with, how the parties see their incentives. The parties will moderate when they think it's in their interest to moderate. Right now they don't. But I'm kind of wondering, and I was going to just kind of go local here for a moment. And so what we have happening in Michigan right now is that there are Republicans pushing legislation to limit ballot access. There are Republicans in the state house calling for a forensic audit. Then on the other hand, of course, just today, you have Republicans in the state Senate issuing a report saying, oh gosh, I guess there wasn't much fraud after all, right? That's all happening within the Republican Party, right? You have members within the party pushing specific proposals based on a narrative about rampant voter fraud in 2020. Then you have a report issued under the auspices of the Republican Party saying, well, we're not so sure about this. It's all happening within the party. And one of the things I've been hearing over the last couple of days is, some hand-wringing within the Michigan Republican Party about the wisdom of continuing to push the whole narrative about voter fraud in 2020. The concern being that if this becomes something of a litmus test going into 2022, it's that becomes the center of gravity for Republicans. It hands Democrats an issue, and Republicans end up shooting themselves in the foot. And I'm wondering if that's really what it's going to take to kind of break some of these pathologies we've been talking about. It's going to have to be, one of the parties, and right now it looks like it would likely be the Republican Party, basically having a near-death experience electorally before they finally realize, gosh, maybe we should carve out a different path. And I'm wondering, and it kind of keeps Tim with the scorched earth theme. I mean, that's where we're heading. Something truly traumatic has to happen.
And to your point, Julio, the rules of the game and the way you capture legislative have a majority in the legislature, and the Republicans have a majority in most of the legislatures, and they get to draw the seats. And when you limit voter access, then you're able to not have a near-death experience. They've avoided near-death experiences by controlling the district lines, having majorities. And so what you would normally expect, a near-death experience, this is terrible. This, how could we have lost this election? This reckoning, this come to Jesus moment didn't happen because they say to themselves, well, here's what we need to do. We'll just limit access and we'll prevent those people from voting. And we can delay the inevitable a little bit longer, maybe 4, 8, 10 years.
Yeah.
And this will work. And it will work for a while until it won't work anymore because the demographics of the country will flip. But they want to ride out this wave as long as they can. And that's why you see these bills being introduced.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess it's fair to say that either side riding that wave, if they're riding a wave, we're going to try and ride it as long as possible. I'm back to something that resonated with me, Nancy, you said a few minutes ago. You talked about kind of 3 issues. You talked about childcare, you talked about infrastructure, and you talked about immigration. Immigration is a very emotional topic, so let's set that aside. But aren't we all concerned that we have bridges that aren't safe? We have roads that are falling apart. That affects all of us. It doesn't matter what my bumper sticker says. And yet we can't get something done because we're entrenched on either side. And some people say, oh, the need is there, we'll give you this much, but you're not going to tax my people to pay for it. So we can't seem to get, each side would say, hey, we've given the other side a compromise position and they rejected it, so it's their fault. That's kind of the American politics way of life, right? But it is disquieting that something as non-controversial as a bridge falling apart can't get done. And I'm not saying either side is to blame. I guess I'm saying that in a way, both sides are to blame because we can't meet in the middle and figure out how to fix the damn bridge. I sound like the governor, don't I?
Well, you're right. And it used to be that, water projects, roads, that was pure pork. Everybody agreed on it. They loved it. I couldn't get enough of it. And that we can't even agree on something as basic as roads, bridges, things like that.
Water systems, yeah.
We all want it, but the issue is how to pay for it.
Exactly.
And who is going to bear the cost of that, which of course is the issue in all politics, right? Whose axe is going to get gored on this.
Yep.
But there used to be, I remember my parents' generation paid very high taxes because they thought this was an important thing for the next generation. And they believed in it. We want to have the best roads. And if, by golly, we're going to be the leaders and the best, it's going to cost a little bit and we want to be the best. And I don't know how we gotten so far that if I have to give you 1 penny, it's a terrible thing, when giving that penny actually makes us a stronger society, a stronger community. How did we get so far away from that there's no sense of community and loyalty?
And that's something a point I was trying to get to half an hour ago. And I'm kind of this sometimes naive guy. And I remember when I was much younger and I thought that way, and what's good for the next generation, that's where I don't care what it costs me, that's what's going to happen. And we change our point of view. So the senior partner in one of the law firms I worked for years ago used to say, we hire Democrats and retire Republicans. And the whole idea was we get less liberal as we have more to lose. And I see that happening still. He was dead right. We're nearing the end of our time. I want to mention for our viewers that our guests tonight, our 3 experts, are all from the University of Michigan-Dearborn. They're Julio Borquez, Tim Kiska, and Nancy Kursman. And Nancy and Julio are political scientists. Tim Kiska. Most of you, many of you would recognize his name because he is a journalist, a communicator, has been in this community for a very long time, and it's great to have you. I guess at this point, I always like to say to the three of you, what is the question you wanted to answer that I didn't ask?
I was wondering if you were going to ask, do you think the election was stolen? And I would have to say, no, no, no. So, period.
And you'll get people arguing about that. People will be arguing about that the rest of our lifetime.
I know, but yeah, all right. I always say, okay, bring me some evidence.
I hear you.
Yeah. So,
Julio, what did I not ask that you were just dying to answer?
I was dying to get off my chest. You know, I am good because, yeah, no, I'm good. I'm happy. As depressing as the conversation got at some points, I
get it. I feel
Yeah.
I'm the same thing.
yeah.
Nancy?
I do agree with Julio. The one thing I thought you might ask about was the role of the Georgia Project and voter turnout in 2020, which was really something else. And the role of particular groups, making sure that people were energized and voted.
That's a good point. And I did say at the beginning that more people voted in this election than ever in the history of the country. Of course, there are more people to vote, but the fact of the matter is, as a percentage of the population, I suspect it was higher. You would know that. That's a remarkable thing. And here we are. I really am grateful to the three of you. This has been, to me, a fascinating conversation, and I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. I wanted it to be a conversation, and I think it has been. And I hope our viewers at home thought the same thing. And this will be available on our website. I say our website, the War Memorial's website, in recorded form future. This whole session has been presented in collaboration with faculty members from the College of Arts, Sciences, and Letters and the College of Education, Health, and Human Services at the University of Michigan-Dearborn, to whom we are most grateful. This is our last American Democracy series for the summer. We'll take the summer off. But my friends here, Mike Montgomery, Josiah Foster, have been putting together a great program for the fall. Let me tell you about that. Our new live season of live American Democracy events will launch on Wednesday, September 29 at 7 p.m. Our guest that night will be, wait for it, Alexander Hamilton. He will talk with us a little on his views of the government and take audience questions. And later, his alter ego, Professor Hal Bidlack, formerly at the United States Air Force Academy, will help us to better understand Alexander Hamilton in his historical context and to appreciate his work, which continues to shape and influence our nation. I can't wait for this evening, September 29. It'll be a 90-minute, not 60-minute session, because Alexander Hamilton always has lots to say. So watch the War Memorial website during the summer months for details and an opportunity to register for Hamilton Lives, September 29, right here at the War Memorial. Again, Julio, Nancy, Tim, thank you so much for being with us. Enjoy the rest of your summer. We hope you'll be back with us. I'm sure we're going to have plenty to talk about between now and the next election.
See you at Mimi's.
Thanks.
Yeah, okay. Good night, all.
Good
Thanks,
night.
everyone.